Welcome to Wickless Night. There is something different about a night with no light at all, no candle burning, no lamp in the corner, just darkness, silence, and the feeling that something may be closer than it should be. Tonight's stories come from people who lived through moments they still cannot explain. A sound in an empty room, a stranger at the door, a shadow that moved when no one else was there. Before we step into the dark, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy slow, unsettling, true horror stories, subscribe to Wickless Night. Get comfortable. The lights are already gone. I was living in a college apartment with 4 other guys, so there were 5 of us in total. It was one of those places that never really felt quiet when everyone was home. Someone was always coming in late, playing music too loudly, cooking something at a weird hour, arguing over whose turn it was to buy toilet paper, or bringing friends over without warning. The apartment had that usual college smell of old carpet, cheap furniture, laundry that had been left too long in a basket, and food that had been reheated too many times. It was not a nice apartment exactly, but it was ours. I shared a double room with one of the guys. We had separate beds and our own sides of the room, but the space was still small enough that you always knew when the other person was awake. You could hear them roll over. You could hear them get up for water. You could hear their phone vibrate, their chair scrape the floor, or their drawers open. The bathroom was close to our room. It was one of those basic apartment bathrooms, with a sink, toilet, shower, and not much else. Nothing about it stood out. It was always a little messy because 5 college guys were using it, but there was nothing creepy about it. It had the usual problems: damp towels, toothpaste stains, hair in the sink, and a shower curtain that never sat right. One weekend, almost everyone left. I do not remember where they all went. Maybe they went home to see family. Maybe they had plans with girlfriends, friends, or other people from school. Maybe some of them had gone out of town for a party or a game. Whatever the reason, by that weekend, only my roommate and I were still in the apartment. At first, it was actually nice. The place felt bigger without the other 3 guys around. There was no noise from the other rooms. No one was using the kitchen at midnight. No one was leaving the television on in the living room. No one was pounding on doors or shouting from down the hallway. It was just the 2 of us. That night, we went out drinking. Nothing unusual happened while we were out. We went to other people's dorms and apartments, talked to people, drank, and did the normal college weekend stuff. I do not remember the exact places we went or who we saw. It was probably loud, crowded, and forgettable in the way a lot of college nights are. At some point, we came back to our apartment. We were not making a huge scene. We did not come back fighting or acting crazy. We got inside, probably grabbed water, maybe talked for a few minutes, then went to bed. There was nothing strange about the apartment when we returned. The doors were locked. The rooms were empty. The bathroom was normal. There was no sign that anybody else had come back. I remember going to sleep without thinking about anything. Then I woke up in the middle of the night because I had to use the bathroom. At first, I was barely awake. I got out of bed in that foggy, half-asleep state where you know where you are, but your brain has not fully started working yet. The apartment was dark and quiet. There was no television playing, no music, no voices from the other rooms. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator somewhere in the kitchen and the occasional settling noise from the apartment itself. I walked toward the bathroom. I probably expected to turn on the light, use the bathroom, and go right back to sleep. But when I opened the door and saw the room, I stopped. There was blood everywhere. Not one small spot. Not something easy to ignore or explain away. There was blood in the sink. Blood on or around the toilet. Blood in the shower. At first, I honestly could not understand what I was looking at. I stood there staring, trying to wake up enough for the scene to make sense. The bathroom light was harsh, like most cheap apartment bathroom lights. It made everything look too bright and too clear. The red stood out against the white sink, the pale shower walls, and the bathroom floor. For a moment, I wondered if I was still drunk. Maybe I was seeing something wrong. Maybe it was not blood. Maybe it was spilled soda, red drink mix, paint, something from someone's bag, or some weird stain I had never noticed before. But it looked like blood. It smelled wrong, too. Not strongly enough that I could identify every detail, but enough that I knew it was not juice or alcohol. My first thought was my roommate. I assumed something was wrong with him. Maybe he had gotten sick in the night. Maybe he had cut himself somehow. Maybe he had fallen and hit his head. Maybe he had gone into the bathroom before me, cleaned himself up as best he could, and passed out without telling me. I ran back to the room and woke him up. I remember shaking him or calling his name more than once, because I was panicking. He woke up confused. I told him something was wrong. I told him there was blood all over the bathroom. At first, he probably thought I was exaggerating or still drunk. Then he got up and followed me. He was fine. That was the first thing I checked. No blood on his hands. No blood on his face. No blood on his shirt. No blood on his pants. No cuts that we could see. No sign that he had been injured. He was wearing the same clothes he had gone to sleep in. They were clean. He looked at himself, then looked at me. I checked myself too. I had no blood on me either. No injury, no cut, no dried blood on my hands, no stain on my clothes. Nothing. For a few seconds we just stood there in the bathroom looking at each other. Then we looked back at the room. The blood was still there. It had not disappeared. It was not a dream. It was not some trick of the light. We both saw it, and neither of us had any idea where it came from. At that point, our minds went to the obvious explanation. One of the other roommates had come back. Maybe someone had come in late without waking us. Maybe someone had brought another person with them. Maybe someone had gotten hurt, cleaned themselves up and gone back out. But that did not make much sense either. The apartment had been quiet. We would have heard the front door. We would have heard somebody moving around. And if someone had come back hurt enough to leave blood in the sink, toilet, and shower, why would they leave without telling us anything? Still, it was the only realistic possibility. So we checked the other rooms. The first room was empty. The bed was untouched. No bags on the floor, no lights on, no person sleeping there. The second room was empty too. Then the third. Nothing. The living room was empty. The kitchen was empty. No one was hiding in the apartment. No one had returned. No one was in the shower. No one was sitting injured in a dark corner. The front door was still locked. The windows looked normal. There was no sign of a break-in. We checked every room because we did not know what else to do. By then, we were awake enough to understand how strange it was. 5 guys lived there, but only 2 of us were supposed to be there that weekend. We had both gone out, come home together, and gone to bed. Neither of us had blood on us. No other roommates had returned. No one else was in the apartment. But the bathroom looked like someone had been injured there. I remember standing in the hallway with my roommate, trying to decide whether we should call the police. That would have been the reasonable thing to do, probably. But we were college kids. We had been drinking earlier. We did not know whether the blood was from something serious or whether there was an explanation we had not thought of. We did not want to call the police and then have to explain everything badly. We did not want to get ourselves into trouble. because we had been drinking off campus. We did not know if there had been some weird situation involving one of the roommates, and we were about to make it worse. So we made a decision that probably sounds insane now. We cleaned it up. We got paper towels. We got cleaning supplies. We wiped down the sink. We cleaned the toilet. We cleaned the shower. We checked the floor. We tried to make the bathroom look normal again. The whole time, we barely talked. It was not like we were telling ghost stories or laughing about it. We were too unsettled for that. We were just trying to get rid of the evidence of something neither of us could explain. Every time I wiped away another streak or spot, I kept wondering who had been there. I kept expecting to find a clue, a broken razor, a bloody towel, a shattered bottle, a stained shirt stuffed behind something, a note, anything, but there was nothing. No object that explained it, no sign of an accident, no sign that someone had cut themselves, no sign that someone had been attacked, no trail leading out of the bathroom, no bloody footprints, no blood on the doorknob that I remember. Just blood in the places you would expect if somebody had been trying to clean themselves up. That was the thought that stayed with me. It looked as if someone had gone into the bathroom injured, washed blood off in the sink or shower, maybe used the toilet, then left. But no one had been there, or at least no one we could find. Once we finished cleaning, we went back to bed. I do not remember sleeping much after that. Every small sound from the apartment felt louder. The fridge turning on sounded like footsteps. A pipe clicking sounded like somebody opening a door. My roommate shifting in his bed made me look up, expecting him to say he had figured something out. Neither of us did. The next morning, the bathroom looked normal again. The sunlight came through the apartment windows. The rooms were still empty. The other roommates were still gone. Everything had the strange, quiet feeling of a college apartment after a weekend night, but there was no sign of what we had seen. For a while, my roommate and I talked about it. We tried to come up with explanations. Maybe one of the roommates had come back while we were asleep, cleaned up, and left again. But none of them admitted to it. Maybe someone had been using the apartment without us knowing. But there was no sign of that either. Maybe one of us had been injured while drunk, cleaned up, and somehow forgotten. But neither of us had a cut, sore spot, bloody clothing, or any memory of going into the bathroom. Maybe it was something from a food package, a drink, or some stupid college prank. But it did not look like that. It looked like blood. The more we talked about it, the less sense any explanation made. Eventually, we stopped talking about it. That is what people do when something does not fit anywhere in their memory. You either keep chasing it until it takes over your life, or you push it into a corner and tell yourself there must have been a reason. We chose the second option. The other roommates came back after the weekend. Nobody said they had been there. Nobody mentioned an injury. Nobody asked why the bathroom smelled strongly of cleaning supplies. Life kept moving. Classes started again. People came and went. The apartment became noisy again. The weirdness of that one night got buried under normal college life. A few months later, someone came to our room. They were not one of our close friends. They were more like a friend of a friend, someone who had come over with another person. I do not even remember their name. They may have been hanging out for a little while, visiting somebody in the apartment, or stopping by before going somewhere else. At one point, they used the bathroom. They were not in there long. When they came back out, they looked uncomfortable, not terrified, not screaming, just uneasy. They said something along the lines of, "There is something haunting in this room." I remember my roommate and I looking at each other. It was one of those looks where neither person says anything, because both people are thinking about the same thing. The blood. The empty apartment. the locked doors, the bathroom. We asked the person what they meant. I do not remember whether they gave a detailed answer. Maybe they said they felt watched. Maybe they said the bathroom gave them a bad feeling. Maybe they said there was something wrong with the room, something heavy or strange that made them uncomfortable. It may have been a casual comment. Maybe they were the kind of person who always said places felt haunted. Maybe they had no idea anything unusual had happened there, but the timing made it hit differently. They had not been told about the bathroom. They had not heard our story. They had no reason to point to that place in particular, and yet they came out of that same bathroom and said there was something haunting in there. My roommate and I did not tell them everything. At least, I do not think we did. Maybe we laughed it off. Maybe we said, yeah, probably, and changed the subject. Maybe we told them part of what happened, but not enough for them to understand why their comment bothered us. I do not remember exactly. What I remember is the feeling, that moment of cold recognition, the thought that maybe whatever happened that night had not been random. Maybe the bathroom had a history. Maybe somebody had been hurt there before we moved in. Maybe someone had died in that apartment years ago. Maybe there had been an accident, a fight, or something nobody told us about. Or maybe there was nothing there at all. Maybe the visitor only said it because bathrooms in old college apartments can feel creepy. The lighting is bad, the mirrors are stained, the pipes make noise, the shower curtain moves when the air changes. A small room can feel uncomfortable if you are alone in it. Maybe they were just being dramatic. But after what my roommate and I saw, it was hard not to take it seriously. We lived there for another 1.5 years. Nothing else happened. That is almost the strangest part. No more blood, no shadow figures, no noises in the bathroom, no objects moving, no strange visitors saying anything else. Nothing. The apartment stayed normal. Messy, loud, crowded, and annoying in all the usual ways, but normal. We had parties, we studied, we fought over chores, we had people over. We went through semesters, finals, bad sleep schedules, cheap food, and all the other things that come with college life. The bathroom became just a bathroom again, but I never completely forgot that night. Sometimes I would wake up needing to use it and hesitate at the door. Sometimes I would turn on the light and look around before stepping inside. Sometimes I would see a reddish stain in the sink from something harmless, rust, toothpaste, a drink, shaving cream, whatever, and my stomach would drop for a second. Then I would remember that weekend, the empty apartment, the blood in the sink, the blood near the toilet, the blood in the shower, my roommate standing beside me, unhurt and confused. The 5 rooms, all empty. The silence, the cleaning supplies, the fact that we just wiped it away and went back to bed. I have thought about whether we should have reported it differently. Maybe we should have called the police. Maybe we should have taken pictures. Maybe we should have asked the landlord if anyone had lived there before us and whether anything had happened in that apartment. Maybe we should have kept some of it, tested it, or tried to find out whether it was actually blood. But we did not. We were young. We were tired. We were probably still dealing with the effects of drinking. And we were scared in a quiet way, the kind of scared that makes you want to erase the thing in front of you instead of investigate it. I do not know what happened that night. The rational possibilities are there. A roommate could have come back, gotten hurt, cleaned up, and left again without telling us. Maybe they were embarrassed. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they did not want to get anyone involved. Someone could have entered the apartment while we were asleep. Maybe they had a key. Maybe they were a friend of a roommate. Maybe they were hurt and used the bathroom before leaving. It could have been a prank, though I still do not know how or why anyone would do that. Maybe it was not even blood, even though both my roommate and I believed it was. Memory can distort details, especially in the middle of the night after drinking. A dark red liquid can look like blood under bright bathroom lighting. Panic can make something seem more widespread than it is. All of those explanations are possible, but none of them fully fit. What stays with me is not a paranormal image. It is not a ghost standing in a corner. It is not a voice, a shadow, or something moving. It is a bathroom that looked as though someone had been hurt there, in an apartment that should have been empty. It is the fact that my roommate and I both woke up fine. It is the fact that every other room was empty. And it is the fact that a stranger later walked into that same bathroom and came out saying something haunted it. Maybe there was nothing there. Maybe that night was only a strange accident we never understood. Maybe the apartment had an ordinary explanation hidden somewhere in its past. But for one night, in a nearly empty college apartment, my roommate and I found blood where neither of us could explain it. Then we cleaned it up, and for the next year and a half, the room acted like nothing had ever happened. When I was 8 years old, I lived with my foster mom, my 2 siblings, and 2 other foster children who were also living with her. There were a lot of us in the house, and at night, most of the kids slept in the same room. My foster mom had her own room, but the rest of us shared one big bedroom upstairs. At that age, I was used to sleeping around other people. There were always sounds in the room at night. Someone would shift in their bed. Someone would breathe loudly. Someone might mumble in their sleep, kick a blanket off, or make the frame of their bed creak when they turned over. Sometimes one of the younger kids would wake up and need a drink of water. Sometimes somebody would have a bad dream and start crying quietly until one of the others woke up. It was not exactly peaceful, but it was familiar. The room was on the 2nd floor of the house. It had a window that looked out over the neighborhood, and during the day, I liked standing near it. From up there, the streets and yards below looked far away. I could see rooftops, trees, fences, and bits of the road between houses. For an 8-year-old, it felt like having a high-up lookout point. At night, though, the window was different. The world outside disappeared. You could not see the yards properly. You could not see who was walking down the street. You could not see the trees clearly. The glass would turn into a dark reflection of the room behind you, mixed with whatever small amount of light came from outside. Most nights, I did not think much about it. I would get into bed, listen to the other kids settle down, and eventually fall asleep. But one night, I woke up for no reason. It was the middle of the night. I do not know what time it was, because I was 8 and did not have a clock near my bed that I remember looking at. I only know that the room was completely dark and everyone else was asleep. At first, I tried to go back to sleep. I pulled the blanket closer and closed my eyes. But I was not tired anymore. I had that strange kind of waking where your body has rested enough to feel alert, even though the rest of the house is quiet. I lay there for a while listening. One of my siblings was breathing heavily. Another kid was turned toward the wall, completely still under their blanket. Someone made a small sound in their sleep, then stopped. There was no talking, no movement in the hallway, no light under the bedroom door. My foster mom was asleep in her room. Everyone was out. I remember feeling restless. I did not want to lie there staring into the dark, so eventually I sat up in bed and looked around the room. The bedroom was dim enough that I could only make out shapes. Beds, blankets, the outline of furniture, the darker rectangle of the door, the window on the far side of the room. I had always liked looking out that window. Even at night, there was something interesting about seeing the world below while everyone else was asleep. Sometimes there would be a car passing. Sometimes a porch light would be on across the street. Sometimes there would be moonlight on the trees. So I got out of bed and walked over to the window. I was quiet because I did not want to wake anybody. The floor felt cold under my feet. I remember stepping carefully around the other beds and trying not to bump into anything. When you are a kid sharing a room with several people, you learn how to move around in the dark without making enough noise to start an argument. I reached the window and looked outside. At first, I could not see anything. The whole window was fogged over, not just a little mist in one corner. The glass was covered in thick fog, the kind that makes the outside world completely disappear. There may have been a foggy night outside, or maybe the warmth inside the house had caused condensation on the cold window. But whatever the reason, the entire pane was cloudy. I could not see the yard. I could not see the road. I could not see the neighboring houses. I could not see the trees. There was only the pale gray fog on the glass. For a second, I thought it was kind of interesting. Kids notice small things like that. A foggy window can be fun during the day because you can write your name in it or draw pictures with your finger. You can make shapes in the condensation and watch them disappear slowly. I may have even thought about drawing something myself. Then I saw the face. It was on the window. A face had been drawn into the fog. Not a messy scribble. Not a random shape that could have been made by water running down the glass. It looked like a man's face. A creepy man, smiling. I froze. The drawing was small, smaller than a real adult face, but clear enough that I knew exactly what it was. It had eyes, a nose, a mouth, and a wide smile. Not a cartoon smile, not a happy face. It was the kind of smile that looked wrong because it was too deliberate. The face was looking directly at me. At least, that was what it felt like. It had been drawn from the outside of the fogged glass, or maybe from inside, but I had no memory of anyone doing it. I had not drawn it. My siblings were all asleep. The other foster kids were asleep. There was no way one of them had gotten up, walked to the window, drawn a perfect little face, and gone back to bed without me noticing. And even if someone had, why would they draw that? The entire room was dark. The window was high above the ground because we were on the second floor. The outside was completely fogged out, and there, in the middle of the glass, was a small, smiling man's face looking back at me. I remember the feeling moving through my body. It was immediate, a deep, cold chill, from my head all the way down to my feet. Not because the room was cold, because something inside me suddenly understood that I did not want to be standing there anymore. I stared at the drawing for a few seconds, maybe longer. My brain tried to explain it, but I was 8 years old, scared, alone at the window, and surrounded by sleeping kids. I did not have any reasonable explanation ready. Maybe one of my siblings had drawn it earlier in the evening. Maybe it had been there before everyone went to sleep, and I never noticed. Maybe the window had fogged up around an old fingerprint pattern or a mark somebody had left on the glass. Maybe someone had drawn it during the day and the condensation made the shape appear again at night. That is possible. Windows can hold fingerprints. Smudges can show up when condensation forms. A person can draw something on glass, wipe it away, and later the oils from their hand can make the old shape appear again. Maybe the face had been there all along. Maybe it only looked creepy because I was seeing it in the middle of the night. But at that moment, none of those thoughts came to me. All I knew was that there was a face on the window. It looked too perfect, too clear, too intentional, and it was smiling. The worst part was that I could not see anything outside the window. If there had been a person standing below, I would have been terrified, but at least I would have known what I was looking at. But there was nothing visible beyond the fog. The glass hid everything. The face could have been drawn by somebody outside. The face could have been drawn by somebody inside. The face could have been old. The face could have been new. There was no way to know. I did not touch the window. I did not wipe the drawing away. I did not lean closer to inspect it. I did not call out for anyone. I did not wake my foster mom. I did not wake my siblings. I just stood there for one more moment, staring at it, feeling like it was staring back. Then I ran. I ran back to my bed as quietly as I could. I remember climbing under the blanket so fast that I almost tangled myself in it. I pulled the covers over my head and curled up tightly, trying to make myself as small as possible. I did not say anything. I did not whisper to my siblings. I did not call for my foster mom. I did not tell anyone in the room what I saw. I just stayed under the covers. The blanket felt like the only thing between me and the window. I know that does not make sense. A blanket cannot protect you from anything. At 8 years old, though, it feels different. When you hide under the covers, you can pretend that the thing you are afraid of cannot see you. You can convince yourself that if you do not look at it, it cannot look at you. So I stayed there. I listened to the room. Everyone was still asleep. Nobody got up. Nobody walked around. Nobody spoke. I kept waiting to hear the window open. I kept waiting to hear someone tapping on the glass. I kept waiting to hear footsteps outside the bedroom door. Nothing happened. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me more afraid, because the silence left too much space for my imagination. I began wondering whether the smiling face was still there. I wondered whether it had changed. I wondered whether it was closer to the bed now. I wondered whether someone was standing outside the window, looking up at the second floor. I wondered whether the man in the drawing was supposed to be a warning. I had never seen a horror movie scene exactly like that at the time. But kids do not need movies to imagine scary things. A dark room, a fogged window, and a face that should not be there are enough. I stayed awake for a long time. I do not remember falling asleep again. I must have eventually, because morning came. But I remember being scared to move when it got light outside. I remember waiting until I could hear other people waking up. I waited for one of my siblings to get out of bed. I waited for normal morning sounds, someone talking, blankets moving, feet on the floor, a door opening downstairs, maybe my foster mom calling for us. Once everyone was awake, the room felt normal again. The sun made everything less frightening. The beds were just beds. The window was just a window. The dark corners of the room disappeared, but I still did not want to go near the glass. I do not remember whether I looked at the face again in daylight. I may have checked quickly and found nothing. I may have stayed away from the window all morning because I was too scared. I may have thought about telling someone, then decided I did not want them to laugh at me or tell me it was only something a kid had drawn. I only know that I never forgot it. It became one of those memories that stays sharp even after everything around it fades. I do not remember what pajamas I was wearing. I do not remember which bed I slept in. I do not remember what the weather had been like earlier that day. But I remember waking up in the dark. I remember everyone else asleep. I remember walking to the second floor window because I wanted to look outside. And I remember seeing that face in the fogged glass. The smile is the part I remember most. A face can be creepy. A random mark can be creepy. But a smile makes it feel personal. It makes it feel as if whoever drew it wanted somebody to find it, wanted somebody to stand there and notice, wanted somebody to feel watched. Over the years, I have thought about all the normal explanations. It could have been an old finger drawing reappearing when the window fogged up. That is probably the most logical answer. Someone may have drawn the face earlier, maybe one of the kids during the day. The drawing could have been wiped away, but the oils from their finger remained on the glass. Then, when the window became foggy overnight, the pattern appeared again. The fact that it was small would make sense too. It could have been drawn by a child. Maybe one of my siblings had made it as a joke and forgotten about it. Maybe one of the foster kids had drawn it earlier that evening. Maybe I had even seen it before without realizing what it was. Then, in the middle of the night, with the room dark and everyone sleeping, my brain turned it into something much scarier. That is possible. It is probably what happened, but it does not change how it felt. When you are 8 years old, you do not analyze condensation patterns or leftover fingerprints on glass. You do not think about how window fog works. You see a creepy man's face smiling at you from a fogged window, and you run back to bed. I think the fact that it was a shared bedroom made it even stranger. There were other people right there. My siblings were only a few feet away. The foster children were asleep nearby. My foster mom was in the house. I was not alone, but I felt completely alone. Nobody else woke up. Nobody else saw the face. Nobody else heard anything. The room was full of sleeping people, but I was the only one standing at the window in that moment. That made it feel like the drawing was meant only for me. I never told anyone that night. Maybe I told someone much later. Maybe I mentioned it as a story after I got older. But in the moment, I kept quiet. I was scared that if I told someone, they would make me go look at it again. I was scared that if I woke my foster mom, she would walk over to the window, wipe the face away, and somehow that would make it worse. I was scared that if I said it out loud, it would become real. So I said nothing. I went under my covers and waited for morning. Even now, it is one of those memories that can make me uncomfortable if I think about it too clearly. Foggy windows still do it sometimes. If I see somebody draw on a steamed-up mirror or a wet car window, I think about that face. If I wake up at night and see condensation on glass, I remember how I felt standing there, unable to see through the window, but able to see the drawing perfectly. The strange thing is, I do not remember the face as being complicated. It was not detailed like a portrait. It was just simple lines. Eyes, a nose, a mouth, a smile. But somehow, that made it worse. It did not need to be realistic. It only needed to look intentional. It only needed to look like somebody had put it there. Maybe it was a child's drawing. Maybe it was an old fingerprint pattern. Maybe it was just an ordinary explanation that became a core memory because I was young, tired, and scared. But I have never forgotten the chill that went through me when I saw it. I have never forgotten how silent the room was. And I have never forgotten running back to my bed, pulling the blanket over my head, and deciding that whatever was smiling at me from the window did not need to know I was awake. In 1999, when I was a freshman at Ferris State, I had an experience that I still cannot explain. I was 19 at the time. My girlfriend was around the same age, and my younger brother was visiting me. He was probably 17. We were all young, bored, and looking for somewhere private to hang out for a while. Back then, people were more careful about where they smoked weed. You did not just sit outside your dorm or park somewhere obvious. You found a quiet place, preferably far enough away from campus and houses that nobody was likely to bother you. That was why we were out on the back roads. The country outside Ferris State could get empty quickly. Once you drove away from the town and the campus, there were long stretches of narrow roads, fields, wooded areas, and scattered houses. During daylight, it was not especially strange. It was normal Michigan countryside. At night, especially in winter, it felt different. There were no streetlights on most of those roads. The headlights from the truck only showed what was directly in front of us: snow-packed pavement, dark tree trunks, ditches full of frozen weeds, and the occasional mailbox or driveway appearing out of nowhere. It had snowed earlier. The snow on the sides of the road was piled up and dirty where plows had pushed it back. The road itself was mostly clear, but there were icy spots and patches of slush. The temperature was low enough that the cold seemed to settle into everything. Even with the heater running, the truck never felt truly warm. My girlfriend was sitting beside me, and my little brother was in the truck with us. We were talking, laughing a little, just trying to pass time. I do not remember exactly what we had been saying before it happened. I only remember that the mood was normal. Then I saw her. A woman came running out of the woods. At first, I did not fully understand what I was looking at. 1 second, there was only the dark line of trees beside the road. The next, a figure burst through the snow and brush and started running toward my truck. I hit the brakes. My first instinct was not to get out. I had recently watched a movie, I think it was Cobra, though I may be remembering the title wrong, where people pretended to need help on the road, then used it to trap or rob someone. That idea had stuck with me more than I realized. So when this woman ran out of the woods toward us, my mind immediately split in 2 directions. One part of me thought she clearly needed help. The other part thought this could be a setup, and I had my girlfriend and younger brother in the truck. That changed everything. I was not only thinking about myself, I was thinking about protecting them too. We were on an isolated road in the middle of winter, at night, with no one else around. If something happened, there was nobody nearby to hear us or help. The woman reached the truck. She looked terrified. Not nervous, not upset, not like someone who had lost her car keys or needed a ride to the nearest gas station. Her face had the kind of fear you only expect to see in horror movies. Her eyes were wide. Her expression looked frozen. She kept turning toward the woods and then back toward us, as though she could not decide which direction was more dangerous. She was bleeding. I do not remember every detail of where the blood was coming from, only that there was enough of it for me to know she had been hurt. It was not something I could ignore. I rolled down the window or opened the door enough to speak to her. I told her to get into the truck. I said I would help her. I do not remember my exact words, but I know I tried to make it clear that she was safe with us. There were 3 people in the vehicle. My girlfriend was right there. My younger brother was in the back. I thought that might help her trust us, but she would not get in. That was the first thing that made no sense. She had run out of the woods in freezing weather. She was bleeding. She looked terrified enough to barely stand still. Here was a warm truck with people offering to help, and she refused. She stood close enough that I reached out and touched her hands. They were ice cold. Not just cold because it had snowed. Not cold like somebody who had been standing outside for a few minutes. They felt deeply frozen, like she had been out there for a long time. The cold from her skin went straight through me. I remember being shocked by it because it did not feel normal. I asked her what happened. I asked whether someone was after her. I asked whether she needed us to call the police. But she did not really answer the questions. She kept saying the same thing. Keep it away from me. At first, I assumed she meant a person. Maybe somebody had attacked her. Maybe someone was hiding in the woods. Maybe there was a man with a weapon back there. Maybe she had escaped from a car or a house nearby and was terrified of whoever had hurt her. But the way she said it did not sound like she was talking about a person. She did not say, "Keep him away from me." She did not say, "They're coming." She said, "Keep it away from me." She kept using the word "it." That was what stuck with me. The way she spoke made it sound like whatever she feared was something she could not name, something she did not understand, something that was not supposed to be there. I remember looking past her toward the trees. Everything was dark. The snow reflected some of the truck's headlights, but beyond that, the woods were completely black. The branches looked like tangled lines against the night sky. There was no visible road, no house lights, no headlights from another vehicle. Nothing. Then lights appeared in the woods. They came from behind her. I still do not know what they were. At first, I thought they might be headlights from a vehicle. That would have been the obvious answer. Maybe there was a hidden driveway, a trail, a road I could not see. Maybe somebody was driving through the woods or approaching from another direction. But the lights did not look right. They were not clearly shaped like headlights. They did not come from the road. They seemed to glow from inside the trees, moving or shifting behind the branches in a way I could not understand. The woman saw them. The moment she saw them, she panicked. She did not get into the truck. She did not ask us to drive away. She did not run down the road toward town. She ran across the road and disappeared into the woods on the other side. That was the part that made my mind stop working. She had come out of one side of the woods in terror. She had run up to us. She had refused help. Then, the moment those lights appeared behind her, she ran straight into the woods on the other side of the road. She did not run toward safety. She ran into darkness. I remember sitting there for a second, stunned. Nobody in the truck spoke. My girlfriend started crying, not quiet tears. She was really upset. She had seen the same thing I saw. She had seen the woman's face. She had heard her voice. She had watched her run away into the trees. My brother was quiet too. I was quiet because I did not know what to do. Part of me wanted to get out and follow the woman. She was bleeding. She was cold. She was obviously scared. Leaving her out there felt wrong. But another part of me knew how dangerous it would have been. It was dark. The woods were unfamiliar. There was snow on the ground. I did not know who else was out there. I did not know whether the lights belonged to someone who had hurt her. I did not know whether the whole thing was a trap. And I had my girlfriend and my younger brother in the truck. I could not leave them alone on the road. I could not bring them into the woods. I could not risk all three of us walking into something we did not understand. So I left. I still think about that decision. I know it may sound cruel to say I drove away from a bleeding woman who was clearly terrified, but in that moment, I did not know whether we were witnessing someone who needed help or walking directly into a situation that could have gotten all of us hurt. I was 19. I was scared. I had two people with me who I felt responsible for. We drove away. The truck felt different after that. The heater was blowing, but nobody felt warm. My girlfriend was crying. My brother kept looking out the windows. I kept watching the rearview mirror, expecting to see headlights behind us or someone coming out of the trees. Nothing happened. The road stayed empty. We got back to town or somewhere safer and called the police. We reported what happened. We told them we had seen a woman outside Ferris State, out on the country roads. We explained that she was bleeding, scared, and running from the woods. We told them she refused to get into the truck and ran into the trees after strange lights appeared. I do not remember every detail of what the police asked. They probably wanted a location, a description, and a timeline. We gave them everything we could remember: the road, the direction we were driving, the approximate place where she came out of the woods, what she looked like, how she acted. I hoped they would find her. I hoped there would be some follow-up. Maybe they would call us back and say they found a woman who had been in an accident or escaped an assault. Maybe there would be a news story. Maybe someone would explain that a car had crashed nearby or that there had been some kind of incident in the area. But nothing ever came. For weeks afterward, I checked the newspaper. Every day I looked for something. A missing person report, a local crime story, an article about somebody found in the woods, a car accident, a woman needing medical help. Anything. I never found one. No news report, no follow-up, no explanation. That bothered me more than I expected. If she had been a real person in a real emergency, I wanted to know she survived. If there had been a crime, I wanted to know the police found whoever was responsible. If there had been a normal explanation, I wanted it. But there was nothing. It was as if the entire thing disappeared the moment she ran back into the woods. Over the years, I have tried to make sense of it. The most logical explanation is that she was a real person in distress. Maybe she had been attacked. Maybe she was bleeding from an accident. Maybe she had run away from someone violent. Maybe she had been in shock, confused, or terrified, and could not bring herself to get into a stranger's truck. That would make sense. A person who has just been attacked might not trust anyone. Even if help is right in front of them, fear can make them run. Maybe the lights were from the person she was escaping. Maybe there was a vehicle deeper in the woods. Maybe there was a house or road nearby that I did not know about. Maybe she ran toward a place she thought was safer. That is possible. It is probably the most likely explanation. But then there was the way she said it. Keep it away from me. Not him, not them. It, and then there were the lights. I do not know what kind of lights they were. I have seen headlights through trees before. I have seen flashlights, porch lights, distant cars, and reflections on snow. These did not look like anything familiar. They came from inside the woods. They appeared suddenly. They seemed to be close enough to scare her, but not close enough for me to see a person or vehicle. And the second she saw them, she ran. Not toward us. Not down the road, into the other side of the forest. I still do not know what I would have done differently. Maybe I should have stayed and waited for the police. Maybe I should have tried harder to get her into the truck. Maybe I should have gotten out and followed her. But I also know how dangerous that could have been. I was not trained. I was not carrying medical supplies. I was not prepared for a violent situation. I had my girlfriend and younger brother with me. I had no idea whether someone else was watching us from the woods. The fear on that woman's face made it feel like something was very wrong. The whole scene felt like something you would see in a nightmare. Snow falling lightly, an empty country road, dark trees on both sides, a woman running from the forest, blood on her, hands cold enough to hurt, a voice repeating, "Keep it away from me," then lights in the woods, then nothing. Sometimes I wonder whether she was even talking about a person at all. Maybe she had seen something that scared her so badly she could not describe it. Maybe she was experiencing something in her mind that felt real to her. Maybe she was running from a real attacker, but could not bring herself to say it clearly. Maybe she was trying to protect us by refusing to get into the truck. That is one thought that has stayed with me. Maybe she did not want whatever was following her to follow us too. I know that sounds like something from a horror story, but in that moment, the way she looked at us made me feel like she was not asking for rescue in the normal way. It felt like she was warning us. My girlfriend never forgot it either. She was crying so hard afterward because she had seen the same fear. She had heard the same words. She had watched the woman run across the road into the woods. My brother saw it too. That matters to me because I know I was not alone. It was not a dream. It was not something I imagined after watching a movie. 3 people were in that truck. 3 people saw the woman. 3 people saw the lights. 3 people drove away wondering what was in those woods. And none of us ever got an answer. Maybe the police found her and there was no public report. Maybe she was treated at a hospital and nothing became newsworthy. Maybe she was never found. Maybe there was a completely normal explanation that we were never told. Or maybe something happened out there that did not fit into anything normal. All I know is that it has been years, and I still remember her face. I remember the cold of her hands. I remember her standing in the snow beside my truck, bleeding and terrified. I remember the lights appearing behind her. And I remember the way she ran back into the darkness while begging us to keep it away from her. I never saw her again. I never heard anything in the newspaper. And I still do not know what was waiting for her in those woods. It was not a normal summer camp, and it was not a normal church retreat. We were there Before the next story begins, thank you for staying here in the dark. If this is your first visit, subscribe to Wickless Night for more true stories made for the late hours, when the world is quiet and every little noise feels important. You can also leave a like and tell me which story has made you look around the room so far. Now, let's continue. I live in the backwoods of South Carolina now, and I grew up in South Carolina too, but not in a place as rural as where I live now. I was raised in the country, so I am not someone who moved out here from a city and got scared by every noise outside. I have lived in Nebraska, Illinois, Kentucky, and other places where there were long roads, open fields, woods, farms, and plenty of darkness once the sun went down. I have always known what it feels like to be far away from town. I know what a quiet road sounds like at night. I know what coyotes sound like in the distance. I know that deer can make noises that seem human when you do not expect them. I know that branches scrape against windows, raccoons get into things, and animals can move through brush loudly enough to make you think someone is walking nearby. I did not grow up believing in cryptids. I liked scary stories like most people do. I had heard legends about strange creatures in the woods, things people saw on back roads, and stories about people hearing voices where nobody should have been. But I always treated it like folklore. It was fun to talk about around a fire or watch in a video late at night. But I never took it seriously. That changed after I started living in these woods. There is a difference between living near trees and living surrounded by them. In other places I had lived, there were woods nearby, but there were also neighborhoods, gas stations, streetlights, highways, and enough people around that you never really forgot the world outside your property. Where I live now, the woods feel like the world outside my property. The road is quiet. The houses are spaced out. At night, the darkness starts at the edge of the yard and keeps going. You can stand on the porch and look toward the tree line, and after a certain point, all you can see is black. The moon will sometimes catch the tops of branches or light part of the road, but the spaces between the trees stay dark. It is the kind of darkness that makes you realize how much you normally rely on artificial light. During the daytime, the woods look normal. They are beautiful. Even, you can hear birds, see deer crossing through the brush, and watch sunlight move through the leaves. There are times when it feels peaceful enough that you forget how different it becomes after dark. But at night, the woods do not feel empty. That is the part I cannot explain to people who have never lived somewhere like this. It is not always fear. Sometimes it is just awareness. You feel like the trees are too still. You feel like there is something on the other side of the yard, just out of sight. You notice when the insects suddenly get quiet. You notice when the dogs stop making noise. You notice the difference between an animal moving through the woods and something that sounds too heavy, too careful, or too close. The longer I lived there, the more things happened that I could not easily explain. I have seen things inside my house, not clearly enough that I could tell you exactly what they were. I have never stood face to face with some creature in the hallway under bright lights. It has always been quick, a dark shape in the corner of a room, movement where there should not have been movement, something crossing the edge of my vision when I knew nobody else was home. Those moments are hard to explain because they happen so fast. You look up, and there is something there. Then, you blink, turn your head, or look directly at it, and there is nothing. At first I blamed being tired. Then I blamed the lighting in the house. Then I blamed shadows from cars passing on the road, even when there were no cars. But it happened enough times that I stopped dismissing every single thing automatically. There have been nights when I am sitting in the living room and I feel like someone is standing just outside the hallway. I will look toward it and see nothing. I will tell myself it is only the shape of the doorway or the dark room beyond it. Then, a few seconds later, I will hear something shift in the same area. Not a loud crash, not something dramatic, just the sound of weight moving across a floor or something brushing against a wall. The house will be empty except for me. Those are the moments that make the hair on the back of my neck rise. Outside the house is worse. I have seen things directly outside, sometimes through the windows. Again, not always clearly. That is what makes it difficult. You see a shape, but it never stays long enough for you to understand it. It is there near the edge of the yard, or between the trees, or near the side of the house. You can tell it is not a normal shadow because it moves against the direction of the light. You can tell it is not a deer because it stands too high or disappears too fast. You can tell it is not a person because there is no reason for anyone to be there, and because by the time you get to the window again, it is gone. One night I was in the kitchen and happened to look out through the window toward the side of the house. The porch light reached part of the yard, but the trees beyond it were completely dark. I saw something move through the light for a second. It was not close enough for me to see details. It did not make a sound. It just crossed through the edge of the light and slipped back toward the woods. The shape seemed too tall to be a dog and too narrow to be a deer. I remember standing there with my hand still on the counter, staring at the window and trying to convince myself it had been an animal. I waited for it to come back. It never did. The worst times are when I am outside late at night. I like sitting on the porch. I always have. There is something peaceful about being outside when the day is over, especially in the summer when the air is warm and the bugs are loud. I will sit there for a while, sometimes scrolling on my phone, sometimes smoking, sometimes just looking out into the yard. At first it feels relaxing. Then, without warning, the feeling changes. It is hard to describe the exact moment it happens. Nothing obvious has to move. There does not have to be a sound. Sometimes the air just seems different. The night becomes too quiet, or the tree line suddenly feels closer than it did a few minutes before. Then I get that feeling, the very real feeling that someone is watching me. Not in the casual way you might feel when a neighbor is outside, or when you see headlights passing on the road. It is more direct than that. It feels like there is something standing in the trees, focused on the porch, focused on me. When it happens, I try not to react right away. I do not want to let myself get worked up over nothing. I tell myself it is a deer. I tell myself it is a raccoon. I tell myself it is just my mind doing what minds do when you are sitting in the dark surrounded by woods. But then I will see movement. A shadow will shift at the edge of the trees. Something will move from one trunk to another much faster than I expect. Sometimes it looks like the darkness itself separates from the tree line for a second and then returns to it. I have seen shadows run back into the woods. That is the closest way I can say it. There will be a shape at the edge of the yard, dark enough that I cannot make out what it is. I will turn my head toward it, and it will move fast. Not like a deer running across an open field, more like a person ducking behind cover after realizing they have been noticed. It will disappear between the trees, and then everything goes quiet again. There have been nights where I went back inside immediately after seeing something like that. I lock the door, check the windows, and keep the lights on longer than I normally would. I will sit in the living room and look out through the glass, hoping I do not see anything else. Sometimes I do not. Sometimes I will catch another movement farther out in the darkness, too far away to know whether it is real. There are roads around here that I do not like driving at night. They are narrow, dark, and lined with trees. You can drive for several minutes without seeing another car. There are places where the woods come close to both sides of the road, and your headlights only show what is directly in front of you. I have seen things on those roads too. I have seen figures standing near the shoulder where there should not be anyone walking. I have seen shapes cross the road too quickly to identify. I have seen something tall move through the light from my headlights and vanish into the trees before I could slow down enough to get a good look. Sometimes I try to explain them away. A person walking home, a deer standing upright for a second, a reflection, a shadow caused by branches and headlights. But there are moments where the explanation does not feel strong enough. There are moments where the shape is wrong. Too tall, too thin, too quick, or moving in a way that does not look natural. One night I was driving home late and saw something near the edge of the road. At first I thought it was a person, because it looked upright. Then my headlights hit it more directly, and it seemed to move backward into the trees without turning around. I slowed down. I looked in my mirror. There was nothing there. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe I had only caught a tree trunk at the wrong angle. Maybe fatigue made my mind put a shape where there was none. But I did not feel like I had seen a tree. I felt like I had seen something watching the road. The thing about living in deep woods is that you start to understand how much you do not see. During the day, you feel like you can see everything around you. You can see the yard, the road, the trees, the sky, but at night, you only see what the porch light reaches, what your headlights catch, or what the moon happens to show you. Everything else is hidden. And that leaves a lot of room for things to move without being noticed. People joke about Appalachia. They talk about the woods being haunted, about strange voices calling from the trees, about things you should not answer if you hear them at night. They tell stories about not whistling in the woods, not following lights, not going outside when you hear something that sounds almost human. I used to hear things like that and laugh. Now I do not laugh as quickly. I live on the very outer edge of the Appalachian Range. I am not deep in the mountains where people tell the oldest stories. I am not in some remote cabin miles from anyone. But I am close enough to understand why people who live farther in might believe the things they believe. There are places in these woods where the darkness feels old. There are stretches of road where you feel watched, even when you cannot see anything. There are nights where the wind stops, the animals go silent, and you realize how alone you are, or how alone you are supposed to be. I cannot prove anything I have seen. I do not have clear pictures. I do not have footage that would convince anyone. Most of what I have experienced could probably be explained by animals, shadows, exhaustion, or the fact that the human brain is built to see shapes in darkness. But when you see the same kinds of things over and over, in different places, at different times, it gets harder to dismiss, especially when the feeling comes before the sighting. That is what bothers me most. Sometimes I know something is there before I see it. I will be sitting on the porch, looking down at my phone, and suddenly feel watched. I will look toward the woods and see nothing. Then, a moment later, something moves. Not always, but often enough. I have learned to trust that feeling, not because I think every shadow is a monster, not because I want to live in fear, but because there is a difference between being paranoid and being aware of your surroundings. And out here, you learn to be aware. I still sit outside at night sometimes. I still drive the roads. I still live in the same house. But I do not stay on the porch as late as I used to. When the woods get too quiet, I go inside. When I see a shadow move in a way I cannot explain, I do not stand there trying to prove myself right. I let it go, because whatever is out there does not seem to want to be seen for long, and I have no interest in finding out what happens if I get too close. I also remembered another experience after thinking about all the strange things that have happened since living in the woods. For a while, I was an over-the-road truck driver. I spent long stretches on the road, sleeping in the truck, stopping at truck stops, eating at places built for people who lived their lives between highways, exits, fuel stations, and parking lots full of semis. It is a strange way to live. You are always moving, but a lot of your time is spent waiting. Waiting to be loaded. Waiting to be unloaded. Waiting at a fuel stop. Waiting for traffic to clear. Waiting for enough hours to pass so you can keep driving. Truck stops become familiar in a way normal restaurants and stores never do. You start recognizing the same chains, the same kinds of parking lots, the same old lights glowing over rows of trucks, the same tired people walking in and out of convenience stores at 2 in the morning, the same smell of diesel, coffee, fried food, and cigarette smoke. For a while, my ex-wife traveled with me. She came on the road with me for part of that time, and it was nice having someone there. Long-distance driving can get lonely, and having another person in the cab made the hours feel less endless. We would talk, listen to music, stop for food, and try to make normal moments out of a life that was anything but normal. One time, we stopped at a Country Pride restaurant to sit down and have a real meal. For people who do not know, Country Pride is one of those restaurants connected to truck stops. It is the kind of place where truckers, travelers, tired families, and people driving long distances can sit down and get a full meal instead of grabbing something fast at a counter. I remember stopping there. I remember parking the truck. I remember walking inside with my ex-wife. I remember being tired but hungry, the way you get after spending hours behind the wheel. I remember us being seated and sitting down at a table. After that, my memory gets strange. Not completely gone, just missing in pieces. I remember us getting our food. I remember the plates coming to the table. I remember the general feeling of eating, talking, and waiting to leave. Then I remember walking out of the restaurant with her and heading back toward the truck. That is where the weird part happened. As we were leaving, my ex-wife brought up how strange it had been that I invited a random stranger to sit with us. At first I thought I had misunderstood her. I asked what she was talking about. She looked at me like I was joking. She said I had invited someone to sit down and eat with us. I told her I had not. I had no memory of doing that. I thought maybe she meant someone had asked to sit at our table because the restaurant was crowded, or maybe someone I knew had come over and joined us for a minute. But she explained it like it had been something I had done willingly. According to her, I had invited a stranger over to our table. Not a friend, not another truck driver I knew, not somebody we had seen before. A stranger. I remember feeling confused more than scared at first. I tried to replay the meal in my mind. I remembered sitting down. I remembered the food. I remembered the restaurant around us. But I could not remember anyone else at the table. I asked her what the person looked like. I asked what they said. I asked why I would have invited them over. But the more she talked about it, the more uncomfortable I felt. She was certain it had happened. She was not joking. She was not trying to scare me. She just thought it was strange that I had done it. Meanwhile, I had absolutely no memory of it. I had little to no memory of the meal itself beyond the beginning and end. I could remember being seated and getting our food. I could remember standing up and leaving, but the middle was blurry, almost like I had been there physically without being fully present. That is hard to explain, because I had not been drinking. I had not taken anything. I was tired, sure, but truck drivers are always tired in one way or another. You learn to recognize the difference between being exhausted and losing time. This did not feel like normal exhaustion. It felt like a section of the night had been removed. I kept asking her about it as we walked back to the truck. She told me again that I had invited the person to sit with us. She said we had eaten together. She said I had been talking normally. She said nothing about me seemed wrong at the time. That was the part that bothered me the most. If I had been acting strange, she would have noticed. If I had seemed confused, drunk, sick, or out of it, she would have said something. But apparently I had acted normal. I had invited someone to sit down. I had eaten a meal with them. Then I had left, and I did not remember it. I tried to think of rational explanations. Maybe I had met another trucker at the restaurant and forgotten because we had only talked for a few minutes. Maybe I had been on autopilot after a long drive. Maybe I was so tired that my brain failed to store the memory properly. Maybe I had been distracted by work, stress, or travel. All of those things are possible. But it still did not sit right. I am not usually someone who invites strangers to sit with me and my wife while we are eating. I am polite, but I am not that social. It would have been out of character for me even on a normal day. And if I had done it, I feel like I should remember why. I should remember the conversation. I should remember the face. I should remember at least something about the person. But there was nothing. Only a blank spot. Only my ex-wife telling me that something had happened that I did not remember. The drive after that felt different. We got back into the truck, and I kept trying to pull the memory forward. I tried to picture the booth. I tried to remember who had been sitting where. I tried to remember whether there had been a third plate on the table or another person walking beside us when we left. Nothing came back. I remembered the restaurant itself. I remembered the lights. I remembered the smell of the place. I remembered sitting down with my ex-wife. But the meal felt like a dream you know you had, but cannot hold on to after waking up. The more I tried to remember, the less solid it felt. At some point I stopped asking questions because I could tell my ex-wife was getting uncomfortable too. Maybe she realized how serious I was when I said I did not remember. Maybe she expected me to laugh it off. Maybe she thought I had just forgotten a short conversation. But I had not forgotten a short conversation. I had forgotten an entire person sitting at our table. There is something unsettling about realizing that you may have had an interaction with someone and your memory did not keep it. It makes you wonder what else you have forgotten. It makes you question how much of your day you are really aware of. It makes you think about all the times you have been tired, stressed, or distracted, and wonder whether anything strange happened during those moments too. I never got a clear answer for it. I do not know who the stranger was. I do not know why I invited them to sit with us. I do not know what we talked about. I do not know whether there was something ordinary about the situation that my memory simply failed to hold on to. Maybe it was just fatigue. Maybe my brain had shut down for part of the meal because I had been driving too long. Maybe I had been functioning on habit, doing normal things without forming memories of them. That would be the logical explanation. But even then, it is disturbing. Because I have been tired many times in my life. I have driven long distances. I have worked difficult hours. I have had days where I barely remember getting home. But I have never had another moment where someone told me I had invited a complete stranger to sit at my table and eat with me, and I had no memory of it happening. That experience still comes back to me sometimes when I think about strange things. Not because I am sure it was supernatural, not because I think the stranger was something inhuman, but because it reminds me how fragile memory can be. You can be sitting somewhere, talking, eating, acting normal, and still lose a piece of time without realizing it. And when someone else remembers it clearly while you remember almost nothing, it leaves you with a feeling that does not go away easily. I remember sitting down. I remember getting our food. I remember walking back out toward the truck. Everything in the middle is gone. And I still do not know who sat with us. My father suffered a hemorrhagic stroke and was admitted to the ICU in critical condition. It happened so suddenly that none of us had time to prepare for what came next. One moment, life was moving along in its normal way. We had worries, routines, plans, and ordinary conversations. Then everything became about hospital calls, test results, doctors speaking in careful voices, and waiting for news that we were terrified to hear. A hemorrhagic stroke was not something I fully understood at the time. I only knew that there was bleeding in his brain, that he was in a serious condition, and that the people treating him did not give us much hope. Every time a doctor came to speak with us, I watched their face before I even listened to their words. I was searching for something positive, some small sign that they believed he would be okay. But there was nothing comforting in what we were told. The doctors were preparing us for the worst. They spoke honestly, but their honesty felt unbearable. They explained that the damage was severe. They said there was little chance of him surviving. They tried to make sure we understood how serious the situation was, but no matter how gently they said it, the meaning was the same. My father might not come home. He might not wake up. He might not survive long enough for us to say everything we needed to say. That kind of fear changes the air around you. It changes the way you move through a room. It changes the way you look at your phone every time it lights up. You begin to dread calls because you know they may bring bad news. You begin to cling to tiny details because they are the only things that feel solid. Was his breathing stable? Did anything change? Did the doctors say the same thing today? Could anyone visit? Was he awake? Did he respond? Every answer seemed to create more questions. My mother had always been very religious. Faith had always been part of who she was. She prayed, believed in God, and found comfort in the Bible. But even strong faith can feel shaken when someone you love is lying in an ICU bed and doctors are telling you there may be nothing left to do. That was how we felt. Not angry exactly, not at first, just lost, completely lost. We did not know what to do with ourselves. We did not know what we were supposed to say to each other. We did not know how to picture a future without my father in it. The thought of him being gone did not feel real, because he had always been there. He was part of the shape of our lives. He was part of every memory that mattered. He was part of the house, the family, the routines, the small things people do not always appreciate until they are afraid of losing them. The idea that he could suddenly be gone left a space in our minds that we could not even look into. On one particular day, my mother went to visit him in the ICU. I did not go with her. She did not want me to see him in that condition. She knew it would affect me deeply, and she was trying to protect me from something she had already seen herself. I think she also wanted to carry some of that pain alone, even though she should not have had to. She went to the hospital, spoke with the doctors, saw my father, and then came home. When she walked through the door, I knew something was wrong before she even said anything. She looked exhausted, not physically tired in the normal sense. She looked emotionally drained, like someone had spent the entire day trying not to break down and had finally reached the point where they could not keep holding themselves together. She was extremely sad. She believed my father was about to die. The doctors had not given her any reason to hope. Whatever she had seen at the hospital had made the situation feel more real to her. Until that point, I think we had both been living in a strange kind of denial. We knew he was critically ill, but some part of us still believed there would be a turning point. We thought maybe there would be another treatment, another test, another unexpected improvement. But when she came home that day, it felt like the hope had gone out of the room with her. We sat together in the kitchen. It was quiet in the way a house gets quiet when people are carrying grief. We were not watching television. We were not cooking. We were not doing anything to distract ourselves. We had turned off our phones because neither of us could handle another notification, another call, another update, or another reminder that the hospital was only one message away. We did not put the phones on silent. We turned them off. Completely off. That detail is important because we both remembered doing it. We were not trying to avoid a call for a few minutes. We wanted the noise to stop. We wanted the constant waiting to stop. We wanted the world to leave us alone long enough for us to understand what we were supposed to do. So we sat in the kitchen and talked. At first, neither of us knew where to begin. How do you talk about the possibility of losing someone who has always been there? How do you start discussing what happens after a person dies when you are still hoping they will not? We tried to be practical because it was easier than being emotional. We talked about what procedures we might need to follow if he passed away. We talked about who needed to be told. We talked about family. We talked about things that nobody wants to talk about until they are forced to. What would life be like after that? How would we continue? What would happen to all the plans that included him? What would the house feel like without him? I remember the feeling of those conversations more than the exact words. It was like we were speaking about something impossible. We were trying to prepare ourselves for a future that did not feel like it belonged to us. Neither of us could imagine life without him. We were scared. We were heartbroken. We were sitting in that kitchen with the phones turned off, trying to decide how to face something that felt too big to face. Then Psalm 91 began to play. At first, I did not understand what I was hearing. The sound came from one of the phones. It was not a random notification sound. It was not an alarm. It was not a ringtone. It was the Bible passage, Psalm 91, playing clearly in the kitchen. My mother and I both froze. For a second, I think we were too shocked to move. We had turned both phones off, not put them on silent, not left them face down, not restarted them, not left a video paused in the background. We had physically powered both phones down. And yet Psalm 91 was playing. I looked at my mother. She looked at me. Neither of us spoke. The kitchen felt completely still around us. The lights were on. The house was quiet. The phones had been off. But the words of the psalm continued to fill the room. Psalm 91 is often read as a prayer of protection, comfort, and refuge. My mother knew it well. Because of her faith, it was not just another passage to her. Hearing it in that moment, when she believed she was about to lose her husband, felt impossible to ignore. It felt personal. It felt like an answer. Or at least, it felt like something we were meant to hear. Neither of us reached for the phone right away. We just sat there in complete shock, staring at one another while the psalm played. I remember feeling cold all over, not because the room was cold, but because I could not understand how it was happening. I kept thinking that there had to be an explanation. Maybe one phone had not fully shut down. Maybe we had made a mistake. Maybe it had restarted somehow. Maybe a setting had triggered an audio file without us realizing it. But even while those thoughts ran through my mind, I knew how deliberate it had felt when we turned the phones off. We had done it together. We had talked about needing quiet. We had watched the screens go dark. And still, Psalm 91 was playing. My mother was religious, but at that point she was beyond simply being comforted by a familiar verse. She was stunned. I was stunned too. We sat there for what felt like a very long time, but it was probably around 5 minutes. 5 minutes of not knowing what to say. 5 minutes of wondering whether we should touch the phone. 5 minutes of hearing words about protection and safety in a moment when we felt completely helpless. The psalm continued in the kitchen. We did not stop it. We did not know how to stop it. Eventually, the shock became exhaustion. There was nothing else we could do that night. We had already cried. We had already talked through things we never wanted to discuss. We had already spent the day fearing the worst. So we went to bed. The psalm kept playing in the kitchen. I remember lying awake for a while afterward, listening to it from another room. It was strange, but it was not frightening in the way strange things sometimes are. It felt heavy, emotional, and impossible to explain, but it also brought a strange sense of calm. The whole night felt like it had moved outside normal time. My father was still in the ICU. The doctors had still told us there was little hope. Nothing had changed in any official way. But after hearing Psalm 91 playing from a phone that should have been off, something in me did not feel as hopeless as before. I did not know why. Maybe it was because I needed something to hold on to. Maybe it was because my mother needed it. Maybe it was because when you are facing a situation that feels impossible, even the smallest sign of comfort can feel like a lifeline. Or maybe it was something more. The next morning, we waited for news from the hospital. I remember feeling nervous before the update came. After a night like that, it was hard not to hope. But hope can be dangerous when you are afraid of being disappointed. I did not want to let myself believe that anything had changed. Then we got the news. My father had suddenly improved. At first, I do not think we understood what that meant. We had spent so much time hearing bad news that any positive update felt almost unreal. We needed to hear it more than once. We needed the doctors to explain it carefully. But they did. The bleeding in his brain, which had been described to us as an amount roughly equivalent to a cup of coffee, was gone. The doctors had no explanation. They had expected the worst. They had prepared us for the possibility that he would not survive. Now they were looking at a situation they could not fully account for. They said it was a miracle. I cannot describe what that felt like. One day we had been sitting in the kitchen talking about death. We had been trying to imagine funerals, arrangements, and a life without my father. We had turned our phones off because we could not bear the weight of more news. Then Psalm 91 had begun playing, and the next day my father improved in a way no one had expected. It felt like the world had turned upside down. My mother was overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed. We had gone from believing that we were about to lose him to hearing that the situation had changed completely. There was relief, of course, but there was also disbelief. When you have spent days preparing yourself for tragedy, good news can be hard to accept at first. You keep waiting for someone to say there has been a mistake. You keep waiting for the doctors to correct themselves. You keep asking whether the improvement is real. But it was real. My father had improved. The blood that had been such a major concern was no longer there. The doctors could not explain why. For my mother, there was no question about what she believed had happened. She believed God had answered. She believed the psalm playing that night was not random. She believed it was a message of protection, a sign that she should not lose hope, even when everything around her said there was no reason to hope. And after what happened the next day, it was hard for me not to understand why she felt that way. I know people may look for another explanation. Some may say that medicine is complicated, that bodies sometimes respond in unexpected ways, that scans can change, that recovery can happen in ways doctors did not predict. Maybe that is true. I am not claiming to understand every medical possibility, but I know what my family experienced. I know the doctors had told us to prepare for the worst. I know my mother came home believing my father was going to die. I know we sat in the kitchen talking about what would happen after he was gone. I know we turned both phones off. And I know Psalm 91 started playing anyway. Then, the next day, my father improved in a way the doctors themselves could not explain. For me, that night changed the way I think about hope. Before that, hope felt like something fragile, something you held on to only when there was evidence that things might get better. But that experience taught me that sometimes hope appears when there is no clear reason for it. Sometimes you are sitting in a kitchen, exhausted, grieving someone who is still alive, trying to prepare for a future you do not want. Then something happens that reminds you not to give up yet. My father's illness was terrifying. The hospital experience was terrifying. Hearing doctors say there was no chance of survival was something I would not wish on anyone. But in the middle of all that fear, we had one moment that did not feel like fear. The psalm playing in the kitchen did not feel like a threat. It felt like comfort. It felt like someone telling us to hold on. And then, somehow, my father did. Even now, I think about that night. I think about the quiet kitchen. I think about my mother sitting across from me, devastated and trying to remain strong. I think about us turning our phones off because we could not handle another update. I think about the sudden sound of Psalm 91 beginning to play. I think about the way we froze, staring at one another in complete shock. And I think about waking up the next day to news that no one expected. My father's survival will always be connected in my mind to that night. Maybe people will call it coincidence. Maybe people will call it an unexplained medical recovery. Maybe people will call it faith. Maybe they will call it a miracle. I do not know what word is perfect for it, but I know that when we were at our lowest point, when we believed there was no reason left to hope, something happened that gave us strength. And the next day, my father came back from a place where everyone had told us he could not. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, I was at my grandparents' house. I do not remember exactly what time of day it was, but I remember the house well enough that the moment has stayed clear in my mind for years. My grandparents' house was one of those places that felt warm and familiar during the day. There were always little sounds coming from somewhere. The television might be playing in the living room. Someone could be talking in another room. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen, and the floors had certain spots that creaked when you stepped on them. As a child, I loved being there. It felt safe because it was family. I knew where everything was, and I knew that if I called out, one of my grandparents would answer from somewhere nearby. But there was one part of the house I never liked much. The kitchen had a door that led into the garage. The garage itself was not unusual. It was just a normal garage, with stored things, tools, boxes, and whatever else my grandparents kept out there. But it could get very dark. Even during the day, the far corners of it seemed darker than they should have been. At night, it became almost completely black. As a kid, that darkness felt bigger than the garage itself. The kitchen lights would be bright and normal, but the little window in the garage door always showed a patch of darkness on the other side. When the garage light was off, you could not really see much through it. You could only see the vague shape of the garage beyond the glass, and sometimes reflections from the kitchen. I had gone into the kitchen to get something. It was probably a drink, a snack, or something small one of the adults had asked me to bring back. I do not remember what I was looking for. That part of the memory is gone. What I remember is walking into the kitchen alone and then looking toward the garage door. The door was off to my right. The window in it was dark, and there was something looking in. At first, I did not understand what I was seeing. It was not a clear face. It was not a person standing under a light. It was more like a shadowy outline pressed into the darkness beyond the small window. But it had a shape. It looked like someone was standing on the other side of the door, close enough to peek through the glass. It was only partly visible, like it was leaning in, like it was trying to look into the kitchen without fully showing itself. The moment I looked at it, it turned away. Not slowly, not in a way that could have been a shadow changing because I moved. It turned away with a clear, sudden motion, as if it had realized I had noticed it. I remember freezing. I did not scream right away. I do not think I even understood enough in that first second to feel fear properly. My brain was still trying to turn what I saw into something normal. Maybe it was my grandfather. Maybe it was a coat hanging somewhere in the garage. Maybe it was a reflection from the kitchen. Maybe the darkness had created a shape and my eyes had made it look like a person. But the more I tried to explain it, the stranger it felt. Because it had moved, and not just shifted. It had looked toward me, and then it had turned away. The silhouette was dark enough that I could not make out a face. I could not see its eyes, its mouth, or the details of its body. But there was one part of it that was strangely clear in my memory. It looked like it was wearing a fedora and a coat. That sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud. It sounds like something from an old detective movie. A man standing under a street lamp in the rain, wearing a long coat and a hat pulled low over his face. The kind of figure you might see in an old black and white noir film. But that is exactly what it looked like. A tall, dark outline. A hat with a brim. A long coat or long shape around its body. And the impression that it had been peeking through the garage door window before turning away from me. At that age, I did not have a word for what I saw. I did not know about shadow people. I did not know about paranormal stories on the internet. I did not know that other people described dark figures wearing hats. I only knew that I had seen something in the garage door window that looked like a person, but did not look like a normal person either. The kitchen suddenly felt too quiet. I remember standing there and staring at the door. Part of me wanted to walk closer and look again. Kids do strange things when they are scared. Sometimes you want to run away. Sometimes you want to make sure you really saw what you think you saw. Sometimes your fear and curiosity happen at the exact same time. But I did not go closer. I did not want to look into that dark garage again. I do not remember whether I called for my grandparents. I do not remember whether I ran back into the living room or stayed in the kitchen for a few seconds before leaving. I only remember that the image stayed with me. It was not the kind of memory that disappears after a day. It was not like a bad dream that becomes fuzzy by morning. The more time passed, the more certain I became that I had seen something. Not something I could explain. Not necessarily something supernatural. But something. For years, the memory stayed in the back of my mind. I would think about it at random times. Sometimes it came back when I was in a dark garage. Sometimes it came back when I saw a coat hanging in a hallway. Sometimes it came back when a reflection in a window looked human for half a second. I would remember that shape in the door window, the fedora, the coat, the way it seemed to be peeking in, the way it turned away the moment I looked at it. As I got older, I started trying to explain it more rationally. Maybe it had been a shadow from something in the garage. Maybe there was a coat hanging on a hook and my childhood brain turned it into a person. Maybe the shape changed when I moved and I only thought it had turned away. Maybe the light from the kitchen had reflected in the glass in a strange way. Those explanations all sounded possible. In fact, they sounded more likely than the idea that something dark and human-shaped had been standing in the garage. But there was always one detail that I could not get past. It looked back. That was what my memory insisted on. It had been peeking through the window, and when I looked at it, it turned away. It was not the kind of thing I could prove. I did not have a photo. I did not have another person standing beside me who saw it too. I had no evidence except the memory of a scared child in a kitchen. Still, the memory never really left. Then, a couple of years ago, I was watching a long conspiracy video online. It was one of those huge videos that moves through dozens of strange subjects, old stories, internet mysteries, conspiracy theories, and paranormal ideas. I was watching it more out of curiosity than anything else. At some point, the video mentioned something called shadow people. I had heard the phrase before, but I had never really paid attention to it. Then an image came up. It showed the kind of figure people often describe in those stories, a dark human-shaped silhouette, sometimes with a hat, sometimes with what looks like a long coat. The figure was often called the Hat Man by people who claimed they had seen something similar. The moment I saw that image, I felt a shock go through my body. I got chills immediately, not because I suddenly believed every story I had heard online, not because I thought I had discovered proof of anything, but because the image looked so close to what I remembered seeing in my grandparents' garage door window. The hat, the shape, the coat-like outline, the dark silhouette. For years, I had thought it was strange that my memory included something as specific as a fedora. I had wondered whether I had invented that detail later because it sounded dramatic. But seeing that image made the old memory come back so strongly that I could almost feel the kitchen again. I could picture the door. I could picture the dark glass. I could picture the outline leaning in from the garage. I could picture it turning away. And even now, writing about it gives me goosebumps. The strange thing is that I do not really know what to do with the memory. Part of me knows that childhood memories can be unreliable. People can remember feelings more strongly than details. A dark space can make a coat look like a person. A reflection can look like movement. A kid can see a shape for 1 second and carry it for years because it happened at the exact age when imagination and fear are both intense. That is the logical side of me. But the other side of me remembers how real it felt. I was not dreaming. I was awake. I was in a familiar house. I was standing in a brightly lit kitchen. And in the dark window of the garage door, I saw something that looked like a person watching me. Then it turned away. I started reading more about shadow people after seeing that video. Not obsessively, but enough to understand that a lot of people claim to have seen similar figures. Some describe them as black silhouettes. Some say they appear in bedrooms during sleep paralysis. Some say they are only visible for a moment in hallways, doorways, or corners of rooms. And some specifically describe a figure wearing a hat or coat. There are a lot of theories attached to them. Some people believe they are spirits. Some think they are hallucinations caused by lack of sleep, stress, anxiety, or the brain trying to make sense of darkness. Some people connect them to sleep paralysis, where a person can wake up unable to move and see human-like figures in the room. Others believe they are something much stranger. I even came across one idea that said shadow figures seen indoors might be protective or guardian-like, while the same kind of figures seen outside could be more malicious. I do not know where that belief came from, and I do not know whether it is based on any real tradition or just something repeated online. It sounds like the kind of thing people say because they are trying to make sense of an experience that does not have a clear explanation. But I thought about it anyway, because what I saw was indoors, or at least it was at the edge of indoors and outdoors. It was on the other side of the garage door, looking into the kitchen. It was not chasing me. It was not threatening me. It did not come through the door. It did not speak. It did not make a sound. It only looked in. Then it turned away. That is the part that makes me wonder whether it was something harmless. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a coat. Maybe it was a reflection. Maybe it was a shape in the dark that my brain turned into a person because I was 6 or 7 years old and the garage scared me. But maybe it was also something that did not want to scare me. Maybe it noticed me looking at it and moved away. Maybe it had always been there, and I only happened to see it once. I do not know. What I do know is that my grandparents' house always had a certain feeling to it. Not necessarily a bad feeling, just a feeling that you were not always alone, even when the rooms were empty. There are houses that feel empty when nobody is in them. Then there are houses that feel full of memories. My grandparents' house was full of memories. It had generations of family life in it. It had old furniture, old routines, old stories, and familiar rooms that had seen people grow up, move away, visit, argue, laugh, celebrate, and grieve. Maybe the feeling of being watched came from that. Maybe it came from being a kid in a place where adults were always nearby, even when you could not see them. Maybe I was only afraid of the garage because it was dark. But the memory of that silhouette remains too specific for me to fully dismiss. I remember how tall it seemed. I remember the way the darkness around it looked thicker than the rest of the garage. I remember the brim of the hat. I remember the long coat-like shape. And I remember the clear movement when it turned away. Sometimes I wish I could go back to that exact moment and see it again as an adult. I would want to stand in the same kitchen, at the same distance from the door, with the same lights on. I would want to look through the glass and see whether there was a coat hanging somewhere, a shelf creating a certain shadow, or anything that could explain what I saw. I would want to know if the garage window reflected the kitchen in a way that could have fooled me. I would want to know if there was a shape in the darkness that made sense once you saw it clearly. But I cannot go back. And even if I could, the house may not be the same anymore. The furniture may have changed. The garage may have been cleaned out. The door may have been replaced. The lighting may be different. The exact conditions that created that moment are gone. All I have is the memory. A child walking into the kitchen. A dark garage beyond a window. A shadowy figure peeking in. A hat. A coat. Then the figure turning away when it realized it had been seen. For most of my life, I carried that memory quietly because I assumed it was too strange to tell people. It sounded like something from a movie. It sounded too specific. I thought people would laugh if I said I saw something that looked like a detective in the dark. But seeing the description of shadow people later made me realize that other people have had memories that sound just as strange. That does not prove anything. It does not prove ghosts, spirits, guardians, or dark beings. It does not prove that I saw the same thing other people claim to have seen. But it made me feel less alone with the memory. It made me realize that sometimes people see things they cannot explain, and years later they find out that someone else has described something almost identical. That can be comforting. It can also be terrifying, because it makes you wonder whether the thing you saw was real after all. Even now, I still get goosebumps when I remember it. I still think about that garage door window. I still picture the fedora and the coat. I still remember the exact feeling of looking up and realizing something was already looking back at me. And I still do not know whether it was a shadow, a reflection, a childhood misunderstanding, or something else entirely. But whatever it was, it saw me. And the moment I saw it, it turned away. Tonight's stories are over, but darkness has a way of making memories feel closer. Some people never forgot what they saw. Others never learned what was behind the sound, the voice, or the shape waiting just outside the light. Tell me in the comments which story you will be thinking about after this ends. Subscribe to Wickless Night for more true accounts from the hours when no one wants to be awake alone. Sleep carefully, and do not trust every shadow that stays still.